Okay, so we're covering clipping paths in Photoshop. But I want to show you a Photoshop graphic. Let me save it as a TIFF. It is. Let me make sure it's CMYK. Let me go to image size. That says 350 pixels per inch. It's supposed to be 300. A little more isn't going to hurt us, but it will change the how many megabytes. It was 49 megabytes, now it's 36, so it does matter. You guys don't have infinite hard drive space. And now I'm going to save it, and it's saving as a TIFF. Okay, so this is an openhand.tiff, CMYK, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to place it in InDesign. And I'm not worried about the size right now, I'm just doing a demo. Before I place it, I'm going to draw a, I'm going to use this rectangle tool right here, rectangle tool. I'm going to draw a box, and I'm going to fill it with a color. Okay, now we'll talk about colors another time. So that box, he stands by himself. Now I don't want to put the picture in this box because what if I need to move the picture around? So when I'm working in InDesign, I use it as a digital pasteboard. So make sure you're deselected off of the box, so or any other graphics, because if you're selected on a graphic and you go to place something, it'll place it into wherever you had selected. So I deselect, and I go to File and Place, and mine is on my desktop right now, and it was called Open. Nope, where did I save it to? Hold on, I know where it is. So my type class, Project 1, Images, Open Hand TIFF. See how quickly I can find something? You guys, make sure you organize your stuff. Now I have what's called a loaded cursor. I'm going to pop it out here in the pasteboard. And the project is going to be a 10-inch by 10-inch project, so I wanted to make sure this image was about that size. Now, this does not have a blue background. And I want to clip this out so it does. Now, I can show you the cheap and dirty way, but it doesn't really look that good. Okay? So I'll show you cheap and dirty, but when it prints, it will be cheap and dirty. There is a way to tell it to make a clipping path here in InDesign. Let me figure out where they've put it. Okay, object, clipping path, and I'm going to hit options. I'm going to hit preview, and I'm going to choose detect the edges. Okay, so that's what a clipping path looks like. However, you can see that it's biting into the fingernail, which was white, as was the background. And you can see that there's a certain amount of halo around this. I don't know if I can zoom in. I'll hit OK and then zoom in. It doesn't detect the edges all that well. And it does little things like, on that vector path, it does little things like that. And I'm like, what? That hand doesn't do that. But when I hit Command 0, when I print, this is what I'm going to get. Okay? So even though InDesign does have the ability to detect the edges of things and you can apply a clipping path, it doesn't really do it that well. This is not the professional way. Okay? I'm going to hit Command Z. I'm going to go back to clipping path and options. You could play with the thresholds of things. Oops, that means less tolerance. I'm going to take it down, more tolerance. So you can play with that, and it can do pretty well. But it still does not get rid of that kind of halo-y sort of effect. That halo effect is from the fact that the pixels do that anti-alias thing. You know, the skin tone pixels, anti-alias with the background white pixels. So you don't necessarily want that. Okay? That doesn't look bad, but it's not professional. Some people go, well, why don't you just put that blue in, back there in Photoshop? Well, it's going to take me a lot longer, and I'm needing to use this image across different applications where the background is not blue. So it's a matter of efficiency. And I can just simply move this, and I can move the background completely independent of it in InDesign. Now, sometimes you do want the background to be colored in Photoshop, but in this case, it's not necessary. So I'll go back to Photoshop. And there are a few ways to deal with clipping paths. I usually do mine by hand. When there's a white background, it can make it easier. It doesn't mean it isn't easier. because when you have something that has a white background and you have other elements that are close to the color white, it will grab those. So sometimes you'll use the magic wand. Some people might use the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool, you can just click and drag around certain shapes and it will start grabbing them. It works pretty, whoops, got a little happy there. It works pretty well. Sometimes though, the tolerance on it is not set low enough and you'll have some problems. So I may have to adjust some things to try to get it to work. And it keeps on grabbing the rest of this. I'm like, ah! And maybe you guys have some sort of thing that you do that helps. And you might want to hold the shift key down too if you're trying to grab multiple sections. Oops, but yeah, the tolerance on this is not that great. And what it does is it still does not solve this problem of these pixels where they're anti-aliasing and going into the background. It'll still have that halo effect. So most of the time, because these things get soft to the background, I use a thing called the pen tool. Some people call it the Bezier pen tool. It creates Bezier curves. And I will actually draw my clipping path. And the idea is to have as few pixels as possible. In other words, you don't sit there and do this. Okay, one, it looks choppy, and two, it takes up way too much memory. So I'm stepping backwards. I don't want all those.
Use as few what as possible?
Anchor points, that's what these are. These little square guys, these dots are anchor points. Now I bite into the image just a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll zoom in a little bit more. It's kind of hard to see because it's this color. But I tend to bite into the image a few pixels. And what this does is it gets rid of that halo effect in essence when you do this. And nobody is going to know that there's been a couple pixels cut off of that object. I've never had somebody go, oh, I can tell you cut a couple of pixels off. It still maintains the shape and everything, so it's not really a problem.
You don't want that halo effect because when you put it on the blue,
when you put it on the blue, you get a third color. Yeah, you get this other color. Yeah. You want to try to make this look a bit more natural. Now it's not going to have a soft edge. It'll have a harder edge to it because the vector paths always tend to be harder edge. But at least I will not have that halo where the pixels go from skin tone to white background. Yeah, I'm cutting those pixels right off. Now, there's still a little bit of reflection here from that hand being in this white area. This is a tough image. You know, I would actually probably go here and do a little color casting, maybe make some of those highlights a little bit more cyan colored, but I'm not going to go into a great deal of that right now. So either way, though, I'm going to have to cut some of these pixels off. And I'm clicking and dragging. Now, if you guys have not used the pen tool much, this is a moneymaker right here. This separates the wannabes from the I can. You know, the people who want to do from the people who can do. This pen tool stuff, gosh, it was so funny. About 2 years after I started teaching, which would have been about 2003, we actually had somebody come in here and they said, hey, we need a student who's really good at clipping paths. And we're going to pay him $90 an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah. They had a lot of work they needed to do. Now they don't pay that much anymore, but so there I drew my path. I ended where I started, so this is drawn around. I'm going to go ahead and crop this image because why do I need all that white space? It's just extra data. I don't need all that. So crop extra white space out. I just went from a 36 megabyte image to a 10 megabyte image just by cropping. I could, but if I do a clipping mask and cut out the white, it'll show transparency here in Photoshop. But when I go to place it in InDesign, it will not do any transparency. It'll be white. Yeah. Now, I brought up the paths panel because I want to look at this. This is my working path. This path hasn't been saved. This path has not been prepared for printing or anything like that. Let me make sure that's off. So when I'm in my paths panel, I go to the flyout menu off to the left, and I tell it to save the path. If you're working with multiple paths in one image, go ahead and name it, but this is just one path. So I leave it path 1. And then I again go out to the flyout menu, and I tell it, hey, you're a clipping path. You have to tell it, hey, you are a clipping path. Flatness, 8 is usually what we use in the industry. Hit OK.
What is flat?
That's a very good question. I've never been able to fully describe that. I just know that what our industry standard was about 8. So, yeah, that's one of those few questions I don't have an answer for. So I don't have an answer.
Do you do all three of those things in the one flyout, or you have to go each?
You have to do it. You have to click on that flyout to do the save path. Then you click on the flyout to do the clipping path.
I see.
Now I'm going to save this as, here we go. It's not a TIFF anymore, though they can embed them. They can embed paths and TIFFs, but this is the path itself should be an EPS, encapsulated PostScript file. So here for Photoshop, when we have a clipping path, we save it as, it's still 300 pixels per inch. It's still CMYK, but it will be an EPS. That's the change. Okay? So instead of format TIFF, I'm going to choose EPS, and in this case, Photoshop EPS. I hit save. Guys, this can be a little confusing. It's really, I don't change anything here, but the preview being 8 bits, when I place this in InDesign, it's going to look like an 8-bit graphic, which is, it's going to look low resolution. It's going to look horrible. I can't change that option here. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, let me bring this image into InDesign. Now, there's the InDesign path. This is the old one. Move it off to the side. And I'm going to go File and Place. Whoops, not HTML. Excuse me. File, Place, Command D. I now have my open hand EPS file. I'm going to open it. It'll come up with a loaded cursor. I click out there, and you can see that it doesn't come in with a background. You can also see, quality-wise, it looks like a dog's dinner. Looks bad. This is that 8-bit pixel preview. If you don't care for that and you really want to see it for what it is, you can right-click on the image, and you can go to Display Performance. It's at the very bottom when you right-click an image. I'm sorry if you're sitting in the back, hard to see this. And you can say High Quality Display, and there we go.
That was your clipping.
That's my clipping path.
That's great.
Okay? There's my clipping path, which takes to account the fact that this image, this hand is surrounded by some sort of background. And this is the clipping path that InDesign created. Mine is smoother because I drew it. Theirs has some little hiccups and burps in it. And theirs did not account for the fact that the anti-aliasing in the pixels, it can't do that. It can't account for that. Not yet. Maybe one of these days they'll change that.
Can you go back to Photoshop and show how you save it as EPS?
Sure.
Because when I'm doing it, I don't see EPS showing up.
Okay. Are you in CMYK mode?
No.
Okay, see if once you change it in CMYK mode, you can save it as an EPS. But it was File, Save As, and the format was Photoshop EPS.
Okay.
And that was grayed out, is that right?
No, it wasn't showing.
Wasn't showing up? Okay. Guys, don't save things as PDFs and then place them. A lot of people get in that really bad habit. PDFs are great when you have everything built up and you need to take it to the printer. But don't use PDFs for all of your solutions to your visual problems. PDFs are only appropriate for one thing, and that's preparing a file, the finished file in InDesign. I can write a PDF from it so that Kinko's doesn't need my InDesign. Kinko's is really, or FedEx, whatever, FedEx Office. A lot of these places, they don't spend the money on updating software. And if we are working in 6 or the cloud and you take an InDesign document to them, they won't be able to open it because they have CS4. 2. Exactly. Okay, I'm going to stop the, well, one more question.
Yeah. Oh, what was it called in InDesign when you right clicked to get the high resolution?
Okay, what was it called in InDesign when we right-click to get rid of that 8-bit pixel preview?
Yeah.
Okay, when you right-click, you can go down to Display Performance and choose High Quality Print. And when I'm in Illustrator, I save those as EPSs as well. And they come in looking all crunchy looking, you know, all pixely. They look horrible. If that drives you batty, if you want to get the WYSIWYG, the what you see is what you get. If you want to get the what WYSIWYG look, you'll have to right-click on that image also and tell it to make the display performance high. They didn't used to have that. What's that?
Why does it do that?
Because this takes longer to save. It takes longer to maneuver around the artboard. It's more data. And if you're in a hurry and you're trying, and you got let's say you got a 100-page document and you have an image on every page and you told it to make it high quality performance on every single one of those images, it may take a while to go from page 2 to page 20 because it's got to think about it. Okay, so if you are making everything high quality display, just know that it may slow things down quite a bit. You may have to take it back down to fast display. Ooh, yuck. No, typical. That's what fast display does. It just turns it into a gray box. Take it back down to typical display. And, you know, every once in a while, I'll just make sure, does this look good? I'm a little worried. And then I take it back to typical display. Okay?
You just like go in at the end and make it high quality. Can you do that? Like make everything high quality?
You can just go into your preferences, File, InDesign and Design Preferences. On a PC, it's Edit Preferences, and you can click on Display Performance, and you can say, hey, make everything high quality no matter what.
Yeah.
And you hit OK, and it will automatically do it. Yeah, which is okay as long as everything's running quickly. As soon as your computer starts chugging along kind of slowly, you may have to go back into that InDesign preference and take the display performance back to a medium sort of thing.
Now, when you're ready to print it, do you still have to go in?
No. When you go to print it, it will recognize. This is just for position only as
Okay.
far as the printer is concerned, this image. It's a reasonable facsimile. What it does is when you go to print this or when you go to create a PDF, whatever, it will link up to that image that you created in Photoshop. Guys, once you place an image in InDesign, don't throw the image away. Because this has to link up to it to either create a PDF or print right from InDesign. So the raster image processor is actually reading the Photoshop TIFF file.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is just a link. So make sure that when you use a font or you place graphics in InDesign, you do not throw those graphics away. Don't rename them either. Because then InDesign's going, where did that graphic go? Oh, yeah, I renamed it right hand. It was just called hand originally. And it won't find hand. It'll go, oh, where's hand? I know it's missing. Now you could relink it to right hand if you renamed it. And if I did something to this in Photoshop and I modified it, I can go to my links panel and it'll tell me. If I click on what link it is, it'll tell me if it's been modified. And I can relink up to things through the links area in InDesign. It's really handy. You guys, when I go to grade your stuff, InDesign tells on you right and left. All I do is I'm like, okay, are they scanning things properly? Are they using the right image files, formats, and image modes? When I click on Hand EPS up here, it tells me it's an EPS, it's CMYK. It is a 1 layer, and the resolution should be in there as well. Actually, the EPS won't show the resolution, but the TIFF tells me it's 300 pixels per inch. I guess it doesn't show me the resolution here. I may have to look a little deeper. But this tells everything about that file. So it doesn't take me much to grade your stuff. It used to take me longer because I had to open every image. But this tells me I can pre-flight your job. Pre-flight meaning I know what to look for before I would even print this. Pre-flight is basically making sure things are great before you print them. So I can pre-flight this, and when I pre-flight, I can grade. Like, oh, yep, they didn't flatten their layers. It's still in RGB, and it's 72 pixels per inch. But this is okay. Now, effective pixels per inch versus actual. Let me show you this. This will tell on you too. Let me get this TIFF. Let's say you decided to enlarge this after you placed it. I may have scanned it in at 300 pixels per inch, but the effective pixels per inch is only 239. Don't increase the size of pixel graphics after you place them. it degrades them and it makes them lower resolution. It blows the little squares up bigger, and then that means bigger squares, fewer squares per inch, fewer pixels per inch. And that will start pixelating and getting fuzzy when you print it. So the more I make something larger, the less its resolution. So I tried to make my Photoshop file the size I intend to use and the resolutions, the right resolutions, right file type size. Get it right in Photoshop. Then you won't have these problems later. And they used to call me Eagle Eye Rebecca, some students, because I catch all this stuff. No, you can't do that. And the reason why I catch is I want to make sure you're not making the same mistakes over and over again, because they won't let you make those mistakes out there. They will expect you not to in the first place. And I have had many calls from industry professionals saying, oh my gosh, your students are wonderful. Oh, in the internship they're doing, I set them down. I don't have to hold their hand. They know how many pixels per inch it's supposed to be. They know not to resize their graphics after they place them. Blah, 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 blah. You would not believe how wonderful that is. And how many students don't know that from these other colleges. I'm like, well, I'm glad to know. And then when I get a call that says a student's not doing this properly, it's not because we didn't teach that to them. Then I have to pull that student aside and have a conversation with them, which is not fun. So guys, this is super important. Super important stuff. I am going to stop the recording now. Stop that.